All right. So as I mentioned, a lot of your feedback was really about data. And so we're going to go through some of the ways that you can get some of these data sets. There's a lot of data in Policy Map. There's probably some easier ways to get to data without getting too lost. The tool itself, if you're not familiar, I'll give us a really simple overview of the tool. So that way, at the very least, you know how to make something like a map. But I think, again, the data is what a lot of us are trying to look for. So the map itself or the goal of the map for us is to visualize data. So the map itself is completely interactive, like most online maps. So you can pan around the map around, you can zoom in and out, you can navigate using the bar on the right, and there's even some customizations of the map. You can make it 3D, you can add and remove some of the base layers to the tool. The navigation on the very top is just dependent on how you're looking to use the tool. The right navigation, the location, works like a Google Maps. The goal really is to center the map to the place that you're working in, but also add a geography to the place you're working in. So if you wanted to type in an address, you can type in an address. If you wanted to go to maybe a city like Portland, you can go down and the map will zoom to that city and then draw the little boundary for it. You can do this at a national level or even state level. So I think we went to some place like Idaho, and this allows you to capture just the state within that. Now this is a really important part because some of the ideas and some of the screen caps that were sent is really to try to isolate some of the data that you're working in. So understand that the location bar is also that tool to isolate as we start looking at just data itself. Once you have the map situated to the area that you're in, I'm going to go to Portland again real quick. The next step really is adding data, and that data is these categories above the map. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of data, and I think a lot of the feedback from what you're looking for in today's session is really about some of this different data that we have in the tool. If you just want to get a bit of a general idea of what data is available, there's a really great link in the very top right-hand corner. I'll send this link in the follow-up email with the recording of the session. But this is our data directory. And what this page tries to do is summarize the categories that we're going to talk a little bit about in the tool. And what it does here is, so if you're looking for, let's say, lending data, it'll take you to the lending section. It'll tell you that in the lending category, you'll be able to find data related to bank branches, credit unions, but then also PPP loans. And then we get into the other data sets, including things like HMDA data, mortgage denials, different types of HMDA, SBA loans, SB, small farm loans as well. So what this page is trying to do is give you a really broad summary of the category, so you don't have to go dig too much within the tool itself, but at the very least, it'll give you a general idea of hopefully what you can find within some of these categories. Because what you'll find is when you get into the tool, even the submenu of that category, so things like prime loans from HMDA, you'll see that it breaks out into ethnicity, type of prime loans, be it purchase, piggyback, refinance, and so forth. So lots of ways that data is broken out into it. Still within this page, you'll see that it'll give you the years available. So we just updated HMDA, the source of the data, as well as the geographies for that. So, it's a great place to start. There's a lot of data in the tool, and it seems like there's a lot of interest of different types of data. So this is a really neat place to start. At the very least, they'll give you some ideas of what types of data in some of these categories that we have within the tool. Otherwise, as I mentioned, all those categories are here. So we go to lending. Here's all that HMDA data that we talked about. So you can see how really it's broken down in the tool itself. And sometimes we understand you don't always want to have to dig through these categories. It just might be too much, and there's so many different ways to read this data. Sometimes you can just want to get the data. And so the other search bar on the top left here is just that. It's a simple data search. So that way, if you're looking for something like affordable housing, it'll try to find any data sets that have that set of keywords or keywords within our metadata to try to match that. So we do have some, I'm logged in as a super user, so there's some localized data under my account. But then as you can see, if you get through this, you'll see there's affordable calculations from HUD. And if you keep going through, it'll give you more calculations for those numbers. So the keyword is very important in when it comes to the data search, because it can try to get you to some of these data sets that might be of interest that you're looking for quickly without having to dig too far within the categories. But the good news is hopefully some of these categories make sense in how you're trying to get the data. So if we look at something like lending data or housing information for community development work, so as you saw under lending, not only do we have general lending data sets like bank locations and credit union locations, but we also have some redlining districts, so Hulk boundaries, if you want to see how those boundaries look like on the map. And then, of course, all the HMDA data. And then with HMDA, we worked with the local Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia to really clean up the HMDA data, adding and removing some characteristics about the HMDA to make it much more accurate, as they suggested, based on the methodology. And so with that, we did break out, as you can see, the different ways that HMDA is presented. We did just recently include the mortgage loan denials. So this is coming from the same source for HMDA. And then you can kind of display that on the map. So I'll get to some of these data layers in a moment. I just want to give you some ideas of where some of these data sets come from. So still within lending, you'll find small business loans, so SBAs, small farm loans. And then, of course, we are a CDFI ourselves. And so with this, we do participate in many of these federal programs, which include CDFI funds, new markets, and then, of course, bank programs that we work through. There is data for unbanked data. We don't, I think one of the questions was underemployed. So we have a little bit of unbanked. Unfortunately, if you're familiar with this data set, it is only at the state level. So there's, it's really more used at a national estimate than it is at a local estimate. So yeah, so that's lending. If we want to talk about healthy communities, affordable housing, that really is going to be under the housing tab. So this starts out with some just basic point data sets, which includes locations of multifamily, LIHTC, or public housing sites. But then if you get into the tool itself, you'll see that we have home sale data. This is from a company called Black Knight, which allows us to take their home sales, aggregate it to geographies, and the smallest geography we have from them, I believe, is the tract level. But then you can also see that at zip codes and counties at higher aggregations and such. So they have monthly updates, or I'm sorry, quarterly updates and annual updates to their home sale data. So if I were to add this, just so you can see what it looks like. So this is at the zip code level. If I zoom in, oh, zip code is smallest. I apologize, this is zip code. So with this, you'll be able to see home sale data quarterly at the different quarters available in the legend. I believe. Within housing, you'll find other variables related to affordable housing calculations, everything from basic information like numbers, median rent, number of rent, fair market rent, number of housing based on the housing types, be it group quarters. There's general numbers from the ACS for owners and renters, broken up by race, age, status. We do have cost burden calculations. So if you're familiar with some of these stats, cost burden is basically households that spend at least 50%, or I'm sorry, 30% of their monthly housing costs related to housing or rent. And then there's extreme cost burden, which is 50% in that calculation. Then there's general federal housing programs, be it Section 8, multifamily, subsidized housing programs as well. In the case of looking at unemployment data, it is under economy, so you can see how some of these categories line up a little bit, and hopefully you're getting an idea of how they line up when it comes to what data comes into it. So economy, you will find some basic numbers from BLS, which is the annual monthly numbers from the labor statistics. There is LEHI or LHD, I apologize. And so this is not only employment information, but it's also broken into really unique demographics of employment. So if you're familiar with LHD, it does look at workforce characteristics by both where the workers live, and then, as you can see, where they work. So by residence, by employment. So this is where you're seeing the number of workers, in this case, that are Black, Asian, under 30, or less than 15,000, where they work, based on that characteristic data. All right, so those are some ideas. There is a really, the last one I'll cover for us, just as you can get some ideas of where some of these data sets are from, is the health category as well. So this is going to give you a lot of really unique characteristics about health data. But from this, you're going to find out that there's some really pretty powerful ways to look at health in general. So not just basic data sets like vital statistics, but also data sets related to health conditions for the general population. So things like adults with arthritis, asthma, COPD. So this comes from the CDC, and there's also Medicare data for those same statistics. There's perceived health status, there's risk factor data for those individuals, so you can start seeing how many adults drink, smoke, are obese, overweight, exercise or not as well. There's some cost estimates for Medicaid, as well as health insurance coverage from the ACS. So some of these characteristics can help you understand better healthy communities, as well as access to some of those healthcare needs and such. Is there other data sets that might be of interest? All right. You can definitely use the chat window if you want to, if you have any other interest. But let me add just a piece of data on the map, and we can show you how you can use that data to really customize it and hopefully present it in that work. So let's talk about, we'll do cost burden, which is probably a really neat data set for us to look at. So this is renters that are cost burden. So when you add what we call a layer data, you get these colorful maps that you see on the map. There are some small details that occur on the map itself. You see these little yellowish colors and gray colors and such. Those are really what we call base map settings. They're details. In this case, these are parks. Some are industrial areas, so they have insufficient data. You can remove that, and the goal of removing that is really to clean the map up so the person that you're trying to share that with isn't distracted. So to do that, there's a little gear icon on the bottom, and you can see all the things you can really customize that map with, and it really helps out. So remove parks, remove town names, schools, airports, all these little underlying things, and what you'll get is a much, sometimes, cleaner map.
Phil, is there data around banked and underbanked or unbanked folks? Any sort of bank data?
Yeah, so it's under lending. So there is, as I think I sort of mentioned this a little bit, so there is bank locations. There's PPP loans. We did process all PPP loans above 150,000, as well as the 504 and 70 loans. So those are at point levels. I'll show you that when we talk about points in a second. But in the case of banked or unbanked, we do have it. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, this is, I believe, from the FDIC. So it's only at state level. We used to have a really custom calculation from another CDFI called CFED that created unbanked at small area geographies, but they unfortunately did not fund that any further. So there's a tiny bit of banked. Yeah. But HMDA is probably a good data set for loan information, at least for banks. So with HMDA, you can start looking at things like lenders, so the banks, the top lenders for those small business loans, and the amounts they lend out.
Okay, and just to back up a minute, this is a service that different agencies, cities, government agencies have subscribed to for a fee?
Correct, yeah. So in the case of the San Francisco Fed, yeah, you guys have been using it And generally, we're not familiar with how each bank uses it, but most of the Federal Reserve banks are using
Gotcha.
some type of service.
And all of the different, all of your different clients that sign up for this service have the same data available to them?
That's correct. There are some instances where we will load custom data for that organization if it's a part of their subscription package that they buy for. But otherwise, what the San Francisco Fed has is what everybody has. This is the basic that has all the data.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Right. So let's go back to cost burdens real quick. So for us, a layer data, all that means is that the data is aggregated to a geography. So those geographies are in this what we call the shade by area. So this dropdown not only gives you a sense of the other geographies you can display, but also you can change the aggregation on the map. So if you don't really want to work at tracks, you can zoom this into zip codes if you wanted to and start looking at data at the zip code level. So that way it displays that. And again, if you're looking at this information maybe at a state level and you want to see this data at the county level, then either the system will default and change the aggregation up to a county, or you can force the map to do that using shade by itself. The legend is also all the details about each layer that you display on the map. So in this case, the title in the data is saying this is the percentage of all renters who are cost burden. And again, if you're not familiar with any of the terms that are used in Policy Map, in the legend, the eye icon here will open up what we call the data description. And what this is really going to try to do is give you as much information about each one of these layers on the map, so that way you have a better understanding why or how it's created. So again, cost burden, as it's explaining here, it is households whose gross rent is 30% or more of the household income. And so on the other side for homeowners, there's a cost for homeowners, and that's basically the same idea. So 30% of housing costs is of their income. If you are not sure of data sets that you add and you want to learn more about this in particular, you can always click onto the data dictionary page, which is the same link. That's the source link in the legend here. And what this will do is take you to our data dictionary, which really is for us a source where we publish for any data provider we use in the tool. We'll have an entry for it, and then we just try to extrapolate any methodology that we did, more details about that data, where it comes from. There's always a link to the raw data if you're looking for the raw data itself. But again, so the legend is initially your tool to read the map. So this way it's just telling us that we're looking at zip code level data, and it's saying that in the zip code, anything in a dark purple is a zip code that has at least 49% of the renters spend 30% of their income on rent. And so you can start seeing how those numbers is visualized in this case. The legend, though, is also a really neat tool to be able to customize this data. So in this case, if we're not looking at, let's say, percentage of people that are cost burdened by rent, we want to look at the number of people instead. That's the variables. The variable changes how the data itself is being displayed. So you can see the number of people that are cost burdened as rent. Just change this one more time. Lost this. Or you can change this to a percent change calculation between the years available. So there's a 5-year change against. So now this changes from the percentage of people that are cost burdened to the percentage of households that change that are cost between the 5-year to 2 5-year estimates available. You can see some places that increase and some places that decrease based on that measurement. The other really unique part of the legend is also the ability to make your own cut points and make your own values, because maybe these numbers really don't make sense to the audience that you're presenting it to. These are quintiles basically in Policy Map. So if you're not familiar with quintiles, it's basically our system takes the total number of geographies, in this case zip codes, and basically separates them into fifths based on where the density of that data occurs. So this histogram will show you that It's pretty spread out, but majority of the zip codes that have households that are cost burdened for rent are really around this about 20 to maybe 50% range. So as we move the slider further out, the dark purple area, there aren't many zip codes in the U.S. that are above, in this case, 82%. So that's why there's not much shown. So the quintiles are easy because it does give you initially a rough idea of how the data is being cut up, but being able to make your own cut points, as well as even controlling how many ranges, allows you to simplify the map that you're trying to present this data to. So in this case, I just want to show 3 layers, 3 ranges, and from these 3 ranges, I'll do something very simple, like at least 25% of the households are cost burdened, and then 50% of the households that are cost burdened. So as you can see, what it does is it simplifies the map for the audience that you're presenting it to. So we're still looking at zip code data, but now without having to look at fuzzy numbers that were created by a quintile calculation, this is just saying anything in purple now are at least 50% of the households are cost burdened via rent. And you can do this customization with any layer within Policy Map or any value as well. So that way, if we look at the numbers instead, so this is our quintiles for numbers, we can change this to range one more time, and then we can make our own cut points based on the number of people, the number of renters that are cost burdened. There are some times you'll get into a data set that are what we call categorical data. And all it means is it's kind of a yes-no number. So we look at something like, I'm going to go to a federal program and we'll look at new markets. So this is a combination of new markets, opportunity zone, eligibility. And so with this, we combine those 2 variables. And now you can see anything in a green are places that are eligible for new markets, but not opportunity zones. And then, of course, vice versa, anything in a dark red is opportunity zones and not new markets. So what this allows you to do is when you make your own cut points, you can do it by categorical data. So you can remove places that are eligible for both, or you can just show places that are eligible for both in this case. So the customization for layer data is just depending on the type of data you have on the map itself. Jason has a really good question about accessing the data via an API. We do have an API. It's really not built the way that I think you're trying to use, like the census data, where you're pulling a ton of data into a call. But you can download data in Policy Map. There's a couple easy ways to do it. One of the easiest way is using the search function in the very top. So let's say we're looking for data for Washington State. So when you have a layer on the map and you search for geography, you'll see there's a download icon in this info box. And what this does is opens up what we call the sidebar. And then this is going to give us a list of every census tract in Washington in a spreadsheet, and then the various eligibility for that data. So the download will give you a FIPS code for each tract, so that way you have a boundary identifier for the geography. And then otherwise, you can do this to any data set in Policy Map. So it's not as efficient when it comes to downloading as something like an API within the census, but you do have the ability to download that data at least in the tool. Cool. This also then gets us to some of the visualization options that you have using the tool itself. So again, if you have a geography like Washington State, this info bubble that pops up, which is here, allows you to download the data, but also then take the data into trends. And then probably one of the cool features is the ability to clip the data into the area that you're looking at. So this way you can make a map of just Washington and have all the data for, in this case, new markets clipped within that area. If I were, let me put something really simple like, we'll do Hamda and see how we do here. That was my download. As you can see, it takes a moment here. So the sidebar not only is the ability for you to download the data, but you can also see the data in your clipped area as a table. So what this will do in this case is going to show us every census tract that's in Washington, and in this case, the percentage of home loans that were denied in each one of those census tracts. And we can kind of mouse over the right-hand side, and it'll match the geography being shown in the map. So the goal of this really is the ability for you to visualize data in a tabular format, so you can start seeing each tract. The thing you'll find out is that they are synced together. So meaning that if I were to say, I want to see, instead of census tracts, I want to see this number as maybe counties in the state. So this will change, and now on the right-hand side is counties, and then data on the map is counties as well. So these two things are synced up together, and that also means that you can take that also to the download function and then download a list of every county in the state, and this will give you then the percentage of home loans or percentage of loans that were denied in 2020 for each county. And then same idea, if you wanted to, instead of getting the percentage of loans that were denied, you get the number of loans that were denied, or even the median dollar amounts for each one of those loans. Changing in the legend also changes the download as well as the table feature itself as well. And then the last part that's tied to the sidebar is the legend, probably one of my favorite features in the tool. This allows you to initially see data based on the years available for this particular data set. So this is the trend chart for it, which you can open up as a full trend chart. So if you're ever looking for a time series map or a time series of a geography and data, it is available in the same info bubble that's here under trend. And then there are some ways to get larger geographies. So maybe instead of just looking at data at one state at a time, maybe you're trying to look at the Pacific Northwest. You can use what we call a custom region feature, and that is this little icon in the very top corner. And what this allows you to do then is make your own boundaries. So if you're making an assessment area, of course, you can create a bunch of tracks and assemble those tracks by that. The create feature allows you to create 3 different types of what we call custom region. So you can do a radius report around a point or an address. You can draw on top of the map by clicking the map around, and then the assemble allows you to take a geography and group them together to make a new one. So it initially defaults to my zoom level, which is counties, but I'm going to use states so I can make a Pacific Northwest kind of region. So that way I can just select Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and then give it a custom name. And then the benefit of this is that you can also then take it to those features. So the tables function allows you to get now data for all 3 states in this case, as well as to download for all 3 states at the same time. So the custom region is really neat. Not only does it give you the ability to make your own boundaries, but you can also share these custom regions with other users. So if you're working on a project and you're building a really unique boundary or an assessment area in a place that you're working in, you can share that boundary with other users within the subscription at the same time. And that will appear in the menu here. So you can see Maggie created an account as well as some other users within the tool. And then probably the last thing, a couple of last things I want to talk about is visually, the goal of the maps page is to do just that, give you the ability to kind of visualize all this data sets. And as you can see, there's a lot of unique customizations to be able to download the data or see it in traditional ways. If you do need to export this map, put it into a Word document or a PowerPoint. Again, I'll put Washington State back in the map, and I'll click this. Then you can use the icons in the right-hand corner, and the print icon will do just that. So this will open up what we call a print modal. And basically from this window, you can still pan the map around. You can still zoom in and out. Because Washington is clipped, it allows us to just show Washington on the map. And the purpose of this modal is that what you see in this window is exactly what you're going to export, be it where it's centered, how it's zoomed in, as well as things like the legends. So you can edit the title, you can change the orientation of the map, you can change the format of the export, you can add and remove the features, and you can even move the legends themselves. And then when you're done, it'll save a copy of this onto your desktop, and then from that, you can do whatever you want with that file once it's downloaded. You can also see some of this data in traditional formats, which is a report. So let's say instead of just looking at data visually for King County, I can take King County into our reports feature, which is up here. And then this is a quick access to the different reports within the tool. So if I open up reports, you'll see it's just interface that lays on top. And the goal of reports is to try to give you data that's aggregated and correlated to one type of a report. And then it's up to you to determine the area of that report. So a community profile report for us is really just a demographic report. This will give you things like population data and characteristics about the neighborhoods, home ownerships, job types, crimes and such. There are other reports as well, including the HMDA report, the rental report, and then we have a really unique health report. Once you choose these report types, the next step is to choose the area that you want to capture that report for. So you can go from the map page, as you saw from that little drop-down menu, or from this interface, you can say, type in a place that you wanted to, do a radius around an area, or even use a custom region of a place you did. So let's do King County in Seattle. And the community health report is a report that we built with a couple of insurance programs and health systems. They gave us a really unique input about some of the common values that they used in their community health assessments. And so with that, we created this really unique report. And then from this, you'll see it starts out, these are little tabs that'll take you to these sections individually. But what this report is trying to do is give you all these values across these various indicators into one contained package. So this is the population, the trend charts for population. Some of these are interactive, the age distribution. So this starts out with some really basic information about that particular area, racial characteristics and such. But then we start talking about some of the healthcare data. So access to healthcare. So this looks like there's the number of hospitals in the area, facilities, insurance information. Is it a medically underserved area? So maybe not the entire county, but within Seattle itself, of course. So all these reports, you can download the individual sections if you wanted to add this into, again, a presentation or a document. You can download the entire report into a PDF for you to access. And then, of course, back to the reports page, you can then choose other reports to combine that with. So you want to do a health report and a HMDA report, then you have the system creating these pre-accessed data sets for you. All right, and then the last thing I'll talk about is really just a little bit about how to combine some of the data sets that you might use in the tool and start seeing how they intersect with each other. So let me just go back to Portland real quick for us. And what I mean is that, let's say we'll stick with percentage of home loans that are denied. The default layer, default viewing of our tool is what we call a single layer map. And what that means is the map is going to show you one layer, which is for us an aggregate information for that area. And the single layer, the goal of the single layer maps is to show you the different colors, and each color represents, in this case, the percentage range of home loans that were denied in 2020. So the darker purple means it's over 20%, and the lighter purple is 9% or less. So that's how how the single layer works, but we definitely understand sometimes you want to see how some of these layers might intersect with each other or interact with each other. And that is this toggle in the top right-hand corner. And multi-layer is just that. As the name implies, it's the ability to look at multiple layers in the map at the same time. And it works much different than single layer. So instead of looking at multiple colors, it's one color. And in this case, that one color for home loans that are denied is up to you to determine. And the value of this starts at 0 and it maxes at 100%. And so with this, you can either slide the slider left and right or enter your numbers in the fields itself. And you can see the histogram is still here, telling you that where majority of the tracks that have home loan denials are within this range. So we move this to 35%. There aren't many tracks, so you're not going to get any places. But if I were to bring this number and bring it down to, let's say, 10%, what you get on the map are any track that has at least 10% of the home loans were denied in 2020. And that's really the basics of how the multi-layer maps work. So we can adjust this number as much as you want, maybe 12.5%, you want to get a little more accurate or so. So we'll go back to 10% for now. And then as the name implies, you can now overlay multiple layers on the top of the map at the same time. So I can say of these places that were denied, you can look at this maybe with some demographics related to it, or even employment by demographics. So we can look at economy and see how many workers that are Black African American live in this area. So the next layer that appears is also at 100%, but we're still contained within that first layer of at least 10% of the home loans were denied. And so again, we can use this number and say, let's look at least 5%. All right. So as you can see, the histogram is really tiny because that's really how the range starts. But you can see what it's saying is that in purple are only places that have met both criteria of at least 10% of the home loans were denied in 2020, and at least 5% of the workers here are Black African American. And so the one thing I always want to point out when it comes to looking at this overlay of data is that you're actually not seeing the data within, you're not doing the query within the other layers. So you're not looking at percentage of workers that are Black that have loans denied. You're just seeing how these two layers overlap each other. And so from this, we can add another layer. We can do something simple like maybe, are they in medically underserved area? So now what the map is going to show you is any place that meets all three criteria of at least 10% of loans were denied in 2020, at least 5% of the workers here are Black African American, and then the track itself is a medically underserved considered track from HRSA. And that's really the basics of the multi-layer maps. As you see, the goal of this tool is to give you the ability to start seeing how different data sets might intersect with each other and overlap each other, giving you the tool to identify places that meet very specific criteria that you're trying to work with in this process. The really unique benefit of this, as you can see from this query, is that you are able to now compare data from completely different sources. So we're looking at data from the FFIC, we're looking at data from LHD, and we're looking at data from HRSA on the map. And the commonality of these sources is geography, in this case, census tracts on the map. So you can actually have up to 5 layers of data. And the purpose of that is that if you add more layers, you might have less and less places that meet the criteria that you're trying to match. So you do have the ability to change these numbers to get different values. The neat thing is the default query of multi-layers is what is called an AND function. So this is up here, and all that means is that it's only showing you places that meet all 3 criteria. So it's home loans that are denied and workers that are African American and medically underserved. So sometimes what you do miss though is the information around some of these areas that meet your criteria. So you can click onto it and see maybe how it met 1, how it met none, or sometimes none at all. So that is sometimes what we call the OR function, and you can change the query from the and, which is the intersection of these layers, to the or, which is the overlap of these layers. And what you'll get is sometimes a really interesting map because it'll give you even more information about the surrounding neighborhoods and not just the neighborhoods that met your criteria. So you can still see places that meet all three values, but what you can start seeing is how maybe some places meet two criteria. So this is African-American workers and mortgage denials, or you can see how met other two criteria, which is African-American workers and underserved areas, are just one in this case. So the multi-layer maps is really unique. The goal of the tool really is to give you a bit of a spatial analytics tool, allowing you to overlay different types of data on the map, and then using the ranges for that data to determine what places might meet different criteria that you're working on in that process. Any other questions? Any questions? Okay. And then let me just show you one last type of data, and then that way that should kind of round us off as you're using the tool itself. But if you have any questions as we go through this, as you go through it later on, I'm also happy to answer it as well. So the other data that we have in the tool is what we call a point data set. And what you'll find out is in the tool, when you go to these menus here, the first submenu is what is called a point data set. And a point data set is just that. They're points on the map. And in this case, these are all the different PPP loans. There's a couple of different ways to really simplify this map. As you can see, these are very clustered. So this little window here is showing you there's 68, in this case, applications that occurred in this cluster of points. So you can change how those are looked. So you can change this to a cluster instead of a point. So now what you get is a gradient. So the lighter the color means the less number of points that are there, and the darker means the larger the concentration. The difference between a point data set and the layer data, just add this real quick, as you can see, is the layer data, as I mentioned, is data that's aggregated to geography, so there's no address level data associated to it, whereas a point data set is just that. Each icon on the map represents an address, and if you click onto each one of those addresses, you can see all the information available for each one of those addresses. So in the case of the PPP loan, there was a ton of data that was tracked for each one of these loans. And what we wanted to do is turn much of this data into a filter, because when you first add a point data set, you're seeing 100% of the points based on the extent of the map. And then what the filters allows you to do is whittle down those points into just maybe the groupings of the ones you're trying to identify. So in the case of PPP loan, you can filter by the industry that the loans represent, some really unique characteristics, like is it a women-owned business, is it a nonprofit, is the different racial characteristics of the owners. So let's say we want to do something like, are loans coming from information and finance? So this allows you to select these two characteristics, and now only loans that came from the business that mark themselves as information or finance is displayed in the map. So you can add as many as you want in this query. There's a lot of real estate people. But the neat thing about the filters is that you can combine filters together. So you can say, of these ones that are real estate and finance, how many of them are women-owned? So just this cluster of 2 points. Remove that. You can say, how many are nonprofits? Or none. And then even the characteristics of the owners themselves, or even how many jobs they represent in this case as well. So a lot of different ways that you can filter on the map. Sorry about that. Yeah, we'll see if they have jobs that met these two criteria. So now what we're seeing is any loans that were given to the industries of real estate and finance and insurance, and also had jobs of basically 51 jobs or higher in each one of these locations. So the filters really is a powerful way to look at the point data set, but also be able to use that point data set to narrow down the number of points you're trying to visualize in the map at the same time. And just like we were to download data for Washington State, we can do the same thing. Let's say we want to get data for Multnomah County. So this is for the entire county that we're in. And if I were to do the download now, this would give us all the point data sets for the PPP loans. And in this case, the point data set is all the parts of the data that you see here that is downloaded. So not only can you download layer data, that's 2 geographies, but you can also download points as a point data set as well. All right. Is there anything else you want to? Any other questions? Oh. It's loading up. So this is all of the. This is the PPP loan. So it's a loan identifier, the business. So with point data sets, you're getting the entire point data to the map, and then with layer data, you're just getting the aggregate value to the geography. All right. Is there any other questions I can answer? No. Environmental data sets. Let me see. It would be under quality of life for us. There are some things you can look at: flood zones from FEMA. We do have disaster declarations. We have brownfield Superfund sites. There's parks data. I'm trying to think of other environmental data sets that might be used, but unfortunately, I think this is the main section of it. So you can at least see brownfield Superfund sites, flood zones in a given area. These are really scary polygon maps. The boundaries are very unique. I'm trying to think of other variables related to health. There's lead exposure. There is bridge infrastructure. Not a great map if you live near bridges, but what this allows you to see is the conditions of those bridges and where they are in service and maintenance. So yeah, unfortunately, what we do have is really just brownfield Superfund sites and maybe some flood zone data or environmental data. All right, any other questions I can help answer? All right, so yeah, thank you so much. I know we covered a lot. There's a lot of data here. And again, I will share this session. So if there's an interest, see it again later on. But more importantly, I will have all my information. So if you are going through this process and you're trying to dig data for some programs, so you're looking to collect data for, I'm happy to answer those on a one-to-one basis as you go through it. If you're looking for data, I can happy to try to dig through some ideas about where that data comes from and what if it exists in PolicyMap or not. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to learn about this tool. And yeah, if you do not have access, let me know, and I'll work with Lydia to make sure that we have logins for users.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill, for your time and sharing this great tool.
All right. Thanks, everyone, so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Bye-bye.